Hello, game theorists. Today we are wrapping up Chapter 4. We saw how to find Nash Equilibria. Now we're going to look at some applications and extensions. So one extension we'll look at is that what if you have 3 or more players? So what you do is you write it down as if it were a 2-player game at first, but then you draw an extra table with one table corresponding to each of player 3's strategies. So we call player 3 the page player. I'll show you an example so you can see how that works. So we draw one table for what happens if player 3 picks X. If they're doing that, then we're in this game. So we have player 1 who can pick either I or II, and player 2 can play A or B. So that's what happens if player 3 plays X. Now if player 3 plays Y, then we're in this situation. So our page player, player 3, their payoffs always come last. So if I pick this cell over here, let's pick a different cell. If I pick this cell, then this first number -4 would be player 1's payoff. Second payoff is player 2, that's a 6, and player 3 gets the 1. So now let's do our best response analysis. So for player 1 and player 2, it's very similar to what you saw before. So let's start with that. Let's say that player 2 is playing A. What is player 1's best response to that? Player 1, a row player, has the first payoff, so they look at the 3 and the 2. They realize the 3 is better, so we give that 3 an underline. If instead we're over here and player 2 is playing B, it's better for player 1 to play I, and get the 4, rather than get 2. Switching to the other perspective, if player 1 is playing I, then player 2's best response is B. Our column player's payoff comes second, so they're comparing this number with 1. 7's bigger, so that gets the underline. If player 1 plays II, then player 2 is better off playing B and getting 2 than getting -4. We'll do the same thing for the other table. So if player 2 is playing A, player 1's best response is I, because that gets 2 instead of -4. If player 2 plays B, best response is to play I and get 6 instead of getting 0. If player 1 is playing I, now let's find the column player's best response. Column player's payoffs come second, so they care about the middle number in this row. The biggest one there is the 8. That's better than getting -1. If player 2 plays I, then best response to play A and get 6 rather than playing B and getting 0. So far, this is very similar to what you saw earlier. Now, the part that's different is doing the best response analysis for player 3, the page player. So what they're going to do is compare the two tables. So let's think about it this way. Let's say a player 1 is playing I and player 2 is playing A. That means we're going to be in either this cell if player 3 plays X, or we're going to be in this cell if they play Y. The page player's payoffs come last. That's why I care about these last numbers here, the 0 and the 3. Compare which one's bigger. Last time I checked, 3 was greater than 0, so that one gets the underline. Best response is to play Y. All right, let's move on. So now let's say player 1 is playing I and player 2 is playing B. We'll be in this cell if player 3 picks X. We'll be in that cell if player 3 picks Y. Player 3's payoffs come last, so compare the final numbers there. 3 is the bigger one, so that earns the underline. So hopefully you're starting to see the pattern by now. If player 1 plays I and player 2 plays A, we could be over here if player 3 plays X, or we could be over here if player 3 plays Y. Player 3's payoff comes last. Compare the final numbers, and you see that 1 is bigger than -4, so we underline the 1. Very last one to look at. Player 1 could play I, and player 2 could play B. We're either here or we're there, depending upon what player 3 does. Player 3 would rather get 2 than get 0, so we underline that. Now this last part is the same as before. The cell that has all the underlines is the Nash Equilibrium. That only happens once over here, so Nash Equilibrium is I, B, X. So that's how you set up and solve games with 3 players. Now if you add a 4th player, you do things very, very similarly. Just have to have another set of tables that correspond to if player 4 plays C or player 4 plays D, and so on. So you can scale this up in the same fashion. So that's how you handle 3-player games. There's one other topic I want to finish up in this chapter, but I'm afraid my video on my cell phone is going to run out of memory, so I'll save that for the next episode.